In the late 1970s, China had a one-child policy where the boys were preferred over the girls, which left tens of thousands of girls abandoned and brought to orphanages and foster homes, and they were adopted mainly by American families. I was abandoned on the steps of a police station and brought to the Gayu Children's Welfare Institute on April 17th, 1997, which is actually my given date of birth. And the orphanage was so crowded that they would bind your wrists and your ankles so that way you wouldn't be able to move so much, so they could fit more babies into one crib at a time. And then on April 6, 1998, I was adopted by my Italian-American family. To this day, I still experience racism, and on top of that, I hear ignorant comments constantly about being adopted. I remember one time I was talking to this girl about having kids, and I told her that I didn't want kids right now, but if I did, that I would want to adopt. And she looks at me and she says, "Oh, you don't want to do that because then they're not really yours." So I say to her, "Well, I'm adopted." And she shakes her head at me and she says, "It's just not the same." And this ignorance wasn't just towards me. One time my family went to church on Mother's Day, and the priest had asked that all the women that carried children and gave labor to stand so they could be acknowledged, and my mother stayed seated. And when asked why she wasn't standing, she simply said, "Because I was not acknowledged." It's as if the idea of adopting is inconceivable to people, like the only way to be a family or to be parents is to have biological children. Growing up, it was hard when it came to self-identity. I was either not Asian enough or I wasn't American enough, and people were always pointing it out to me. They'd say things like, "But you're not actually Chinese, you know? For what you are, you speak real good English." And usually I just ignore the comments or I brush them off and laugh because I don't want to make a big deal out of it. But there was this one time I was talking to this guy about how I had an Italian last name. And he asked me, "Oh, so what are you?" So I tell him I'm Chinese and that I was adopted, but my family's Italian. And so he asks me, "So how did that happen?" I briefly tell him how it happened because I'm very open about it since it's just who I am. And he started laughing. And he says, "So I guess your real parents didn't want you then." I didn't know what to say or how to react, so I just let him laugh, and I did absolutely nothing. Adoption is never discussed, and so the stories that adoptees have are never known of, and I definitely feel like that's where all this ignorance comes from, which is also why it is so important that all of our unique stories are shared and heard.
My name is McLaughlin, and I am one of 30 million of China's missing girls. I know for a lot of adoptees that their parents kind of ignore their heritage, or I know they have this sense of longing for that kind of cultural connection, because then when they meet other people of those ethnicities, they don't have the same sort of connections, and I know that can be very hard, like, identity issue to address. Glad that we have different resources available to us to help us connect with each other, like, around the world.
And, you know, it just feels good to know that we're not alone out there.